In July of 2024, Alec Baldwin stood in a courtroom facing the possibility of 18 months behind bars. The charges were read aloud. Cameras captured every breath, every pause. Then, in a moment no one expected, the atmosphere shifted. Before the day was over, the case unraveled. Within hours, it was gone. But what followed would prove even more surprising. 6 months later, in January 2025, Baldwin made a move that stunned friends and critics alike. He turned the tables, filing a lawsuit against the very people who had tried to put him in prison. And yet, this dramatic reversal was not the end of the story. It was the opening of something far deeper, an unresolved chapter that had been quietly forming for decades. Today, that final chapter comes into view. Alec Baldwin did not emerge from the polished machinery of Hollywood privilege. His story begins far from sound stages and premieres, in a modest Long Island community with no connection to fame, at least not yet. He was born Alexander Ray Baldwin III on April 3, 1958, in Amityville, New York. This was years before the town's name would become synonymous with one of America's most infamous crime stories. At the time, it was simply a place where families lived, worked, and raised children. Not long after his birth, the Baldwin family relocated just a few miles away, settling in the Nassau Shores section of Massapequa. It was there that 6 children were raised inside a small, crowded house governed by routine, discipline, and expectation. Faith mattered. School mattered. Sports mattered. Noise was constant. Privacy was rare. Competition was unavoidable. Alec, the eldest, grew up surrounded by siblings and responsibility long before he ever learned the language of performance. After him came Daniel in 1960, William in 1963, and Stephen in 1966. 4 brothers, one roof. Decades later, all 4 will become actors recognized by the same last name, a coincidence that once seemed impossible inside that modest home. Their family history reached back hundreds of years to John Howland of the Mayflower, making Alec a 13th-generation American. Old colonial roots, destined to collide with the modern glare of cameras and celebrity. His father, Alexander Ray Baldwin Jr., had once imagined a future in law. Instead, he chose stability. He became a high school history teacher and a relentless football coach at Massapequa High School. To his students, Coach Baldwin was intimidating. Rules were enforced. Discipline came first. But there was respect beneath the fear. He taught American history as something alive and urgent, as if the past had consequences that could still reach into the present. At home, finances were strained. Side jobs were routine. Pressure was a constant presence. Alec's mother, Carol Newcomb Baldwin, provided the emotional counterweight. She felt deeply and reacted quickly. Arguments were loud. Feelings spilled freely. Years later, after being diagnosed with breast cancer in 1990, she would channel that same intensity into founding a breast cancer research organization, turning personal hardship into public action. This combination, rigid structure and emotional volatility, left its mark. Alec grew up sharp-tongued, informed, and reactive. A teacher's son who understood power, authority, and how to challenge both. The temperament that would later define him on screen and off was already being shaped. By the time he graduated high school in 1976, Baldwin believed his future was clear. His sights were set on Washington, not Hollywood. He enrolled at George Washington University, majoring in political science, already imagining law school as the next step. Georgetown felt like the ultimate destination. He even ran for student body president and lost. It was a small defeat, but one that lingered longer than he cared to admit. Money remained tight. When he moved to New York, he took whatever work he could find. One job placed him at the center of the city's excess, clearing tables at Studio 54. While celebrities danced under flashing lights, Baldwin moved through the margins, stacking plates as drugs floated openly through the room. He watched the spectacle without fully belonging to it. Around this time, friends began noticing something else. His uncanny ability to imitate classic film stars. The ease with which he slipped into voices and personas. They urged him to audition. He did so quietly, without announcing the change to those who still believed he was destined for a courtroom. Something had begun to shift, even if he hadn't named it yet. In 1979, the shift became irreversible. Baldwin left George Washington University and transferred to New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. Law school disappeared from view. Acting took its place. Manhattan consumed him. He trained both at NYU and the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, immersing himself in method acting. The work was intense, personal, and demanding. Students were pushed to break themselves open on command. Feel more. Dig deeper. Go back further. Ironically, while his acting career accelerated, his education did not. He began landing professional roles in the early 1980s, first on the daytime soap opera The Doctors, where he worked from 1980 to 1982, and then on stage. Yet his degree lagged behind. It would take him until 1994 to finally complete his Bachelor of Fine Arts. By then, the irony was unmistakable. When NYU handed him his diploma, Alec Baldwin had already starred in Beetlejuice and The Hunt for Red October. He returned to campus not as a struggling student, but as a recognized star, collecting paperwork for a journey he had already completed. Success did not stop with him. As his career gained momentum in the late 1980s, his brothers followed one by one. Daniel found steady work in television. William broke into major films, including Backdraft in 1991. Stephen entered movies in the mid-1980s and later appeared in The Usual Suspects in 1995. By 2008, all four Baldwin brothers were on television simultaneously. Alec led 30 Rock. William starred on Dirty Sexy Money. Daniel and Stephen appeared on reality programs. The media grouped them together, branding them as a single phenomenon, the Baldwin brothers. Late-night hosts joked about hierarchy and failure, about who mattered most and who had fallen furthest. Beneath the laughter lived something more complicated, pride tangled with rivalry, loyalty mixed with quiet resentment. A family that had grown up crowded together was now sharing the spotlight, whether they wanted to or not. And the story still was far from over. Sharing success is rarely simple when it runs through family bloodlines. And even early in his career, observers began to notice something else about Alec Baldwin. He did not enter a project casually. Every set became a proving ground. Every role a contest of will. On The Doctors, he challenged line readings and pacing. On Knots Landing, he pushed writers to deepen his characters' descent, urging them toward darker terrain. In the theater, he confronted directors directly, guarding rehearsal time as if it were sacred ground. Some admired the intensity. Others braced themselves for it. He questioned authority. He demanded edge. These traits existed long before tabloids would later turn his name into shorthand for confrontation. In many ways, the behavior that would later define his public image was already firmly in place. His real education began on daytime television. From August 20th, 1980 through 1982, Baldwin played Billy Aldrich on The Doctors, appearing in roughly 28 episodes. Soap operas operate at a relentless pace. Scripts arrive overnight. Episodes shoot daily. Scenes can demand 20 or 30 lines with little to no rehearsal. Baldwin later described it as boot camp for actors. Learn fast. Find the emotion immediately. Move on without hesitation. By the age of 24, he had performed in hundreds of scenes and discovered that he could carry narrative weight under extreme pressure. That realization changed how he saw himself. It opened the door to primetime television. In 1984, Baldwin joined Knots Landing as Joshua Rush. Over the course of about 40 episodes, the character transformed dramatically, from a quiet, religious young man into someone increasingly obsessive and dangerous. The writers pushed the arc week by week, and Baldwin followed without resistance. Viewers watched him shift from tenderness to menace in a single close-up. The impression lingered. Handsome, yes, but unsettling. The duality became part of his screen identity. While television paid the bills, Baldwin's ambitions pulled him toward the stage. In 1986, at around 28 years old, he made his Broadway debut in Joe Orton's Loot. Critics took note of how seamlessly his sharp timing translated from the camera to a live audience. 6 years later, in 1992, he tackled one of theater's most demanding roles, Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire. The performance earned him a Tony Award nomination. For Baldwin, that recognition mattered deeply. It confirmed something he had been trying to prove. He was not a television actor borrowing legitimacy from Broadway. He belonged there. Casting directors began to recognize a pattern. Charm fused with volatility. Seduction shadowed by threat. Film opportunities followed quickly. In 1988 alone, Baldwin appeared in 5 major motion pictures, including Beetlejuice, Working Girl, Married to the Mob, and Talk Radio. Again and again, he portrayed men who attracted attention while quietly unsettling those around them. The blueprint was forming. Beetlejuice became the turning point. Released in 1988, the film cast Baldwin as Adam Maitland, an ordinary man killed in a sudden car accident and forced to navigate the afterlife amid Tim Burton's surreal chaos and Michael Keaton's manic energy. Baldwin served as the emotional anchor, calm, grounded, human. The film was made for roughly $15 million and earned about $75 million in the United States alone. Through constant VHS rentals and cable airings in the 1990s, it found an enduring audience. Baldwin demonstrated that he could hold the center of an unconventional studio film without overpowering it. 2 years later, his career escalated sharply. On March 2, 1990, The Hunt for Red October premiered. Baldwin starred opposite Sean Connery as CIA analyst Jack Ryan, translating Tom Clancy's dense Cold War novel into a tense, accessible thriller. The film cost approximately $30 million and grossed more than $200 million worldwide. Critics responded to Baldwin's portrayal of Ryan as intelligent and anxious rather than indestructible. At 31, he appeared positioned for franchise stardom. Then suddenly ended. Baldwin never returned as Jack Ryan. The sequels, Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, went to Harrison Ford. Years later, Baldwin wrote that the studio had negotiated behind his back, using his Broadway commitments as justification to move on. Losing the role in his early 30s stayed with him. He believed it altered the entire trajectory of his career. In 1992, he seized another defining moment. Glengarry Glen Ross gave him a single scene, just over 7 minutes of screen time. It was enough. David Mamet wrote the monologue specifically for the film adaptation. Baldwin storms into the office and delivers a blistering speech about sales, power, and failure, ending with the now iconic line about coffee being for closers. That scene became legendary, circulating for decades as a symbol of ruthless ambition. One appearance permanently etched into cinematic history. Around the same time, Baldwin's personal life began intersecting with his professional reputation. He met Kim Basinger in 1990 on the set of The Marrying Man. Even before filming settled into rhythm, tension surrounded the production. When the film was released in 1991, insiders already knew it had been troubled. Shooting schedules ran long. Costs ballooned. Crew members whispered about delays, many of which were attributed to something happening just beyond the frame. Baldwin and Basinger were falling in love, and their relationship began to dominate the set. Disney executives grew increasingly frustrated as the budget climbed millions beyond projections. Deadlines slipped. The film developed a quiet reputation as a difficult production. Yet none of that slowed the relationship. What began on screen carried over into real life. When the movie finally reached theaters, it underperformed. Its box office returns failed to justify its swollen budget. The film faded quickly from public memory, but something else endured. Within the industry, Baldwin acquired a reputation difficult. It was a label shaped by romance, ego, and mounting pressure, and it followed him into the 1990s. As his career stood poised to rise even higher, his relationship with Basinger only grew louder. On August 19, 1993, the two were married in Griffin, Georgia. Almost overnight, they became one of Hollywood's most closely watched couples, admired, scrutinized, and increasingly inseparable from the drama that surrounded them. By 1994, Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger brought the relationship back in front of the camera, reuniting for The Getaway. The project only reinforced what the public already believed, that their private marriage and professional lives were tightly intertwined. Photographers tracked them relentlessly. When their daughter, Ireland, was born on October 23, 1995, the scrutiny intensified. Every walk through New York, every appearance in Los Angeles became a spectacle. Baldwin had never been comfortable with photographers, but now the tension felt deeply personal. What began as a man shielding his wife and child gradually hardened into something more confrontational. He stopped retreating. He pushed back. Each public clash added another layer to his image, gifted, famous, volatile. The anger became part of the narrative. Even as his personal life burned intensely, Baldwin pursued something ambitious in his career. In the mid-1990s, he set his sights on traditional movie stardom. In 1994, he headlined The Shadow, a slick, stylized pulp adaptation designed to launch a franchise. The studio invested heavily, pouring tens of millions into the production. The returns were underwhelming, roughly $48 million worldwide. It wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a launch either. Quietly, the message landed. He was not being positioned as the next Tom Cruise. After that, the trajectory shifted. He continued working steadily, appearing in thrillers like The Juror in 1996 and The Edge in 1997. But the roles were changing. He was no longer the automatic leading man. Supporting parts appeared more frequently. Ensemble films replaced star-driven vehicles. Just 4 years after anchoring The Hunt for Red October, his hold on box office certainty had loosened. That loss pushed him toward darker, riskier choices. Some paid off. Many did not. One gamble cut deeper than all the rest. Around 2001, Baldwin invested himself fully in a film adaptation of The Devil and Daniel Webster, later retitled Shortcut to Happiness. He directed it. He starred in it. Anthony Hopkins and Jennifer Love Hewitt joined the cast. It was meant to be his artistic declaration. Instead, the project collapsed. The primary financier, Jed Barron, was charged in a federal bank fraud case. The unfinished film became evidence in court rather than a finished work. Legal battles dragged on for years. Ownership remained frozen. When the movie finally surfaced in 2007, Baldwin barely recognized it. He removed his name as director, replacing it with a pseudonym, a quiet acknowledgement that the vision he had poured himself into was gone. At the same time, his personal life was unraveling. In January 2001, Kim Basinger filed for divorce. By the time it was finalized on September 3, 2002, the split had devolved into a brutal custody battle over their daughter. Baldwin later said he spent more than $1 million trying to stay close, on lawyers, constant flights, even purchasing a home in California simply to remain nearby. In his 2008 memoir, A Promise to Ourselves, he wrote about feeling slowly erased from his child's life, not by choice, but by a system he believed worked against him. Anger built gradually. So did despair. Everything detonated in April 2007. During a scheduled phone call his daughter did not answer, Baldwin left a voicemail. Ireland was 11 years old. The message was harsh, deeply inappropriate, and intensely personal. Within days, it leaked. Television broadcasts replayed it. Radio hosts dissected it. The internet amplified it endlessly. What was meant to be private became a public reckoning. In May 2007, a judge temporarily suspended Baldwin's visitation rights. He later admitted the fallout pushed him into depression and dark thoughts. Overnight, his public identity shifted again. He became a caricature, the furious father, the out-of-control celebrity. The incidents did not exist in isolation. Years earlier, in October 1995, he had been arrested after striking a photographer outside his home, just days after his daughter's birth. In 2012, he was photographed pinning another photographer against a car in New York. In 2013, a shoving incident caught on video led to the cancellation of his MSNBC talk show after only 5 episodes. In 2014, he was arrested again following a heated confrontation with police over riding his bicycle the wrong way. Each episode stacked neatly into a single storyline. Alec Baldwin could not control his temper. Late-night television feasted on it. Jokes about the voicemail. Skits about his rage. Even award wins came wrapped in irony. The punchline was no longer his characters. It was him. And yet, in the middle of that collapse, something unexpected happened. In October 2006, Baldwin premiered as Jack Donaghy on 30 Rock. The timing was almost cruel. His personal life was fracturing, but on screen, he found something precise, self-aware, and controlled. Jack Donaghy was wealthy, commanding, bombastic, and quietly hollow. Baldwin leaned into it fully, using the public's assumptions about him as raw material for comedy. Across 139 episodes, the character evolved into one of television's most iconic figures. The accolades followed quickly. 2 Emmy Awards, 3 Golden Globes, 7 Screen Actors Guild Awards. At the same time, Baldwin returned again and again to Saturday Night Live, eventually hosting a record-setting 17 times. While his reputation off-screen remained fractured, on-screen he had found something rare, a role that turned his flaws into fuel and his public image into performance. By 2016, Alec Baldwin's impersonation of Donald Trump had become more than a recurring sketch. It was a cultural event. The performance dominated headlines, earned him another Emmy Award, and openly irritated a sitting president. Television, once again, was reshaping his public image. At the same time, film continued to reveal his range. In The Cooler in 2003, he portrayed a brutal casino executive, a performance that earned him an Academy Award nomination. In It's Complicated in 2009, he shifted gears entirely, playing a flustered romantic lead hiding under tables. He moved easily from The Departed to animated features to European comedies. Slowly, the narrative around him began to change again, less one-dimensional, more elastic. In August 2011, Baldwin met Ilaria Thomas inside a New York restaurant. It was one of those encounters that seemed unremarkable at first and then suddenly consumed everything. Within weeks, they were living together in Greenwich Village, building a fast, intense rhythm that never slowed. By April 2012, they were engaged. On June 30th of that same year, they married at St. Patrick's Old Cathedral in New York City, surrounded by familiar faces: Tina Fey, Jimmy Fallon, Woody Allen. It all happened quickly, but at the time it felt like momentum, not instability. Then came the children, one after another, until the years began to blur together. Carmen was born in August 2013. Raphael followed in June 2015. Leonardo arrived in September 2016. Romeo in May 2018. Eduardo in September 2020. Lucia in February 2021. And Ilaria in September 2022. 7 children in 9 years. Baldwin leaned into the image publicly. Diapers, bedtime routines, family photos. In interviews and on social media, he presented himself as calmer now, softened by domestic life. By June 2024, he even agreed to film a TLC reality series, The Baldwins, centered entirely on their crowded Manhattan home, a public declaration that this version of his life was settled and permanent. But the image never fully aligned with the man people encountered beyond the front door. Even after 30 Rock transformed him into a beloved television figure, the old volatility kept resurfacing. The 2007 voicemail to his then 11-year-old daughter, where he shouted and called her a rude, thoughtless little pig, remained lodged in public memory, a recording that went viral and cost him visitation rights for a time. In June 2012, just weeks before his wedding, photographers captured him shoving New York Daily News photographer Marcus Santos outside the Marriage License Bureau. In November 2013, he was suspended and then dropped by MSNBC after video emerged of him using an anti-gay slur toward a photographer. His talk show, Up Late with Alec Baldwin, was canceled. The message felt unmistakable. No matter how many family photos circulated, his fuse around cameras was still dangerously short. Then, in December 2020, the ground shifted again. Online critics accused Ilaria Baldwin of having spent nearly a decade presenting herself as a Spanish woman named Ilaria, rather than Hillary Hayward Thomas, a white woman born in Boston. Old clips resurfaced, television appearances where she spoke with a pronounced accent, including a Today Show segment in which she appeared to forget the English word for cucumber. A 2012 Vanity Fair España profile that described her as born in Mallorca was quietly corrected years later. Reporters uncovered school records showing she attended high school in Massachusetts under the name Hillary. Business Insider published a detailed timeline outlining how her background appeared to shift depending on context. Slowly, Baldwin was pulled into the controversy. Old interviews circulated of him referring to her as being from Spain. The internet treated it like a puzzle finally unlocked, dismantling polished profiles piece by piece. What had once seemed like a harmless personal narrative became a relentless public interrogation. At the same time, Baldwin was evolving into something else entirely, a political lightning rod. A longtime Democrat and board member of People for the American Way, he became especially visible between 2016 and 2020. His Trump impersonation on Saturday Night Live placed him at the center of the culture wars. He hosted the reboot of Match Game. He interviewed politicians, artists, and public figures on his WNYC podcast, Here's the Thing, which launched in 2011 and ran for more than 150 episodes. In April 2018, he joined Alyssa Milano and Amy Schumer to help launch the Nora campaign, aimed at weakening the NRA in the aftermath of mass shootings such as Parkland, Columbine, and Sandy Hook. By then, Baldwin was no longer just an actor or comedian. He was a symbol, admired by some, resented by others, standing at the intersection of entertainment, politics, and controversy, with very little separation between the roles he played and the life he was living. His voice remained sharp. His opinions stayed loud. To some, Alec Baldwin was fearless. To others, he was exhausting. Either way, by this point, every controversy surrounding him no longer stayed contained. Each one expanded, magnified by a public already primed to react. Then came October 21st, 2021. Just before 1:48 in the afternoon, on the set of the low-budget Western Rust, the day was unfolding like any other Rush production. The film was shooting at Bonanza Creek Ranch, just outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. Baldwin was 63 years old. He was not only the star, but also one of the producers on a project budgeted at under $7 million, scheduled to be completed in just 21 days. Inside a small wooden church set, Baldwin rehearsed a scene. The setup was straightforward. He sat in a pew, practicing a cross-draw with a Colt .45 revolver, aiming toward the camera for a close-up shot. Assistant director David Halls handed him the firearm moments earlier, announcing it as a cold gun, industry language meaning it was supposed to contain no live ammunition and no blanks. When the gun fired, it did not sound like a special effect. The live round struck 42-year-old cinematographer Helena Hutchins in the chest. It passed through her body and then hit director Joel Souza in the shoulder as he stood behind her, monitoring the shot. They were positioned less than 2 feet from the muzzle. Hutchins told those nearby that she could not feel her legs, then collapsed. Souza staggered back, bleeding. At first, confusion reigned. Some crew members assumed it was a blank misfire. Then they saw blood. Jackets and rags were pressed against wounds. Emergency calls were made. A helicopter airlifted Hutchins to the University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Souza survived his injuries. By that evening, sheriff's deputies had shut down the set. The story was already global. As investigators searched the scene, the situation grew even more disturbing. Live rounds, 6 or 7 of them, were discovered mixed among dummy rounds and blanks in gun belts, boxes, and carts, places where real ammunition should never have existed. A supplier later suggested that a batch labeled as dummy rounds may have mistakenly contained live bullets. Investigators were unequivocal. Live ammunition has no place on a film set, ever. Especially not on a rushed, low-budget production where crew members had already complained days earlier about careless firearm handling and unsafe conditions. The irony was impossible to ignore. Baldwin had spent years publicly criticizing the NRA. He had supported anti-gun initiatives. He had once said he could not imagine making another film involving firearms. Now his name was permanently attached to one of the most shocking on-set deaths in Hollywood history. From that moment forward, his late career reinvention collapsed. Lawsuits followed quickly. Criminal charges followed after that. In January 2023, Baldwin was charged with involuntary manslaughter. The charge was later dropped, then reinstated. In January 2024, a grand jury indicted him again. Baldwin maintained publicly that he never pulled the trigger, insisting he only cocked the hammer and that the gun discharged on its own. Prosecutors countered that basic safety protocols had been ignored. Forensic testing suggested the trigger had to be pulled for the weapon to fire. The case crept forward, slowly and painfully, toward trial. Meanwhile, the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, was tried separately. In March 2024, she was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in prison, the maximum allowed. The judge described the conduct on set as a reckless disregard for human life. She appealed. The conviction stood. By July 2024, Baldwin's own trial finally began. And then, almost as quickly, it collapsed. His defense team revealed that prosecutors had failed to disclose key evidence related to the ammunition. The judge ruled that the misconduct was severe and irreparable. The case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. At the defense table, Baldwin slumped. He removed his glasses, covered his face with his hands, then embraced Ilaria. He had been facing the same 18-month sentence Gutierrez-Reed received. In an instant, that threat disappeared. But the story did not end there. Civil litigation continued. The Hutchins family settled one wrongful death lawsuit. Other cases moved forward more slowly. In January 2025, Baldwin filed a malicious prosecution lawsuit against prosecutors and investigators, accusing them of targeting him instead of focusing on how live ammunition ended up on the set. By mid-2025, Baldwin began speaking publicly about the toll. He said the ordeal had changed him permanently. For years, he woke up expecting another subpoena, another accusation, another phone call telling him the fight was not over. He said the dismissal did not feel like victory. It felt like survival. It felt like escape. And yet, his continued refusal to say that he pulled the trigger left many people unconvinced. For some, the legal outcome closed a chapter. For others, it never did. The absence of a final admission became its own echo, hanging in the silence left behind by the verdict. Now, whenever Alec Baldwin's career is revisited, the timeline no longer begins with his triumphs. It does not open with Jack Donaghy or award speeches or the sharp, self-aware comedy that once redefined his image. It begins with a date, October 21st, 2021. Every retrospective circles back to it. Every profile carries its weight. The question lingers, unresolved and uncomfortable, reshaping how the story is told. When people see Alec Baldwin now, do they see the actor who made them laugh? Or the producer standing on a quiet film set, holding a gun, at the moment a cinematographer lost her life? And that question, unanswered, has become the final shadow over everything that came before.